Good morning, everyone. My name is Ronald Browder, and I'm the chair of the advisory board of the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition. I'd like to welcome you today to this March webinar, and today's title of our subject is Buffering the Impact of Adverse Childhood Experiences with Family Social Support. So we're looking forward to hearing from our presenter, but before we get to that, I did want to give a few housekeeping announcements. Our next meeting will be April the 15th at 10:30, and the topic is going to be Recovery Ohio, Drug and Alcohol Services. And we want you all to really put that on your calendar. We're looking forward to hearing the information from our partners at Recovery Ohio. I do want to remind everyone as caregivers that if you're a caregiver and on this call, you need to put your name and email in the chat so that you can be eligible to be selected for the $50 gift card. So please remember to put your name and email if you're a caregiver in the chat. We'll probably say that again at some point during the course of this webinar. Also, certificates of attendance will be provided to anyone who would like one. So if you would like a certificate of attendance for whatever you might need it for, please submit your name to Barbara Turpin, and she will see that you get one. If there are no other things, we will now move into the actual presentation. So today's topic, buffering the impact of adverse childhood experiences with family social support, is being presented to us by Ms. Ivanka Hall. Ivanka is the executive director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. It is an advocacy organization that educates and advocates to empower the community on behalf of issues that affect the Black community. Ivanka has been doing the work in terms of minority health and this work for a number of years. She has she is considered one of the leaders in this area and has spent a great deal of her time and given her life to really making sure that the outcomes for African Americans and people of many different races improve, their health outcomes improve. She has a Master's of Public Administration from the Texas Southern University and a Bachelor of Arts from Notre Dame. She's also a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow. She has been recognized by her high school, the Marshall High School, John Marshall High School of Cleveland, as a Alumni Hall of Famer. Cleveland Payne Diller named her to the Homegrown Heroes for the work that she's done, in particular around food security. And then just sharing a little bit about that, at the time when COVID first hit, Ivanka was moved to really begin to try and provide meals to kinship families who, when the children weren't able to go to school, as you remember, we shut down schools, and so children weren't able to get to schools and get lunches. Ivanka was able to put together a program that served over 50, 60 some thousand children in the Cleveland School District with providing them with meals, not only lunches, but having meals for breakfast as well as dinner. And so she was recognized for that work. And she did that all on her own with the help of a few volunteers. And so she's very much committed to her community. Ivanka's whole effort around this issue of adverse childhood experiences began in 1974 with the murder of her mother. I'm sure she's going to share the story, but it dramatically changed the course of her life and really put her on a trajectory to really deal with issues of trauma and to help families work themselves through that. She's a mother, a grandmother, an activist, as I said, recognized around the country. She has presented in Puerto Rico. She's presented in Curacao. She's been all over the world presenting on issues of minority health. And so without further ado, we want to go ahead and just bring Ivanka to the forefront and let her begin her presentation. So Ivanka, without further ado, if you will go ahead.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you all for inviting me to speak today. Pull up my presentation. Good morning. So the work that I do, for me particularly, this presentation is the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, effectively engaging the African-American community. And so for me, the whole thing around this the cure for Black trauma is justice. The presentation, Buffering the Impact of Adverse Childhood Experiences with Family Social Support, is important to me and important to the work that I do with the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. Ron, how long do I have so I'll know not to monitor my time?
Ivanka, this is Barb. You have about 45 minutes or so. We go to noon, so that's an hour and a half. So about 45, 50 minutes, and then it's time for responses to questions. And if people have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll monitor the chat along the way also.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the things that I presented to Ron was this. Hold it, let me move myself down so I won't be in my own way. Our efforts to prevent ACEs before they happen, which is ACEs is childhood, adverse childhood experiences before they happen, educate the community and to seek policy change. For us, policy change is important. New policies that look at the cumulative impact of ACEs. So we're looking at everything that impacts the community, the things that are going on with your air, your land, and your water, and how those things also impact ACEs, which is something that we don't talk about a lot. And so looking at how they will strengthen individual coping in the face of adversity, enhance family relations and resilience, and promote community to reduce ACE exposure in African Americans. It is important to understand the role of racism, COVID-19, and the social determinants of health when seeking solutions. Many kinship families are caught in a balancing act of trying to manage children that have experienced a traumatic life experience, and many adults are still haunted by the traumatic experiences of their youth. We all must work to create the conditions for strong, thriving families and communities where all children and youth are free from harm. The mission of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, our mission is to create equity in the African American community, addressing the cumulative impact of racial, economic, environmental, and social justice inequities on education, employment, housing, and health by working to educate, advocate for, and empower the community. This is my mom. This is Yvonne Hall. And the little girl right there is me. And so Ron talked to you about my mom. This is the picture on the right with the burgundy background was my mom's driver's license. It was the last picture that we had of her that she took in April of 1974. She was 24 years old. You know, we still have the things in the back. So I had to remove the things in the back so that you could see her picture. But a few years ago, my brothers always got in a lot of trouble. But one time my grandmother said, you know, I think that because they don't have a picture of their mom, that it makes them not value their relationships. And so what I did was I went and had a picture of my mom made so that my family, my brothers, my grandmother would have a picture of her to look at. And so when I think about my mom at 24 years old, losing her life, and the fact that I was 6 years old, 2 months shy of my 7th birthday, when my mom was tragically murdered in front of myself and my younger brothers, I promised that I would use my life to help change the lives of others. But when I think about the adverse childhood experiences that happened to me and my family, it didn't just happen to me, it happened to my whole entire family. When my mom was murdered, every single person that was connected to her was also impacted, whether it was her friends or their children. So we had this whole thing around what happens to everybody that's part of that nuclear unit, the people that are internal and the people that are external to it. And so looking at what I lost that day and what many young people lose during relationships that turn violent is I lost both parents in one evening. So I lost my mom and I lost my father. And so for us, our lives drastically changed. I ended up being raised by my grandparents. My grandmother wasn't quite adjusted to the fact that she had to raise her daughter's children. And so many times it was this whole battle around her looking at us as not her grandchildren, but as her daughter's killer's children. And so just the impact of that alone made me want to make sure that I used everything that I could so that other children wouldn't face the things that we face. My brother that's sitting there on my mom's lap with me is 9 months younger than I am. And I have 2 other brothers. I have a brother that's 4 years younger than me and a brother that's 3 years younger than I am. My youngest brother, was murdered in a racial incident here in Cleveland on his 15th birthday. He never, right before his 16th birthday, he never made it home from school. And so when we talk about these relationships and what happens when families are trying to cope, it's important for us to understand all of the things that are going on within the family unit. So adverse childhood experiences are defined as a traumatic event that happens to children between the ages of 1 and 17. These negative experiences affect the child's brain and health as they grow into adults. ACEs can lead to mental health or chronic health conditions, according to the National Library of Medicine. ACEs disproportionately impacts African Americans because of the profound subjection of historical systemic oppression, in addition to personal intergenerational trauma and exposure. So when I talked about my mom, what I didn't talk about is my mom's younger brother, who was 18 at the time of my mom's murder. He was in a house, we were living in a back-to-back duplex, and he was in the other unit. And he came in to chase my father away. And he was there with me as he called the police and called an ambulance and called the police and called my grandmother to notify my grandmother that she needed to come and get us. I looked at the pain in his face of what was going on as an 18-year-old kid, and he was forever impacted. My uncle has never been the same. It's 50 years later. My uncle is now 68 years old. He'll be 69 years old. And the mental impact of losing his only sister and his oldest sister has impacted him all of his life. In the United States, it's important for us to know that nearly half to 1/3 of youth have experienced at least one ACE by the age of 18, at least half. So what makes ACEs so unique to the African American community? If you actually look at the red line areas of the 1930s and follow the track around ACEs, the impact of ACEs is seen in all of those red line areas. So those are the areas that are more likely impacted. And nobody ever talks about the impact around redlining in ACEs. So this is a map of Cleveland. And so this shows the areas in Cleveland that were impacted. And if I actually overlaid a map of ACEs and the issues that are going on within the community around mental health, around behavioral health, around violence, it would be the same map. It would be exactly the same. Nothing would change.
Ivanka,
Yes.
can you, would you, excuse me, define redlining, please, for some
So
people?
redlining was a practice of the real estate industry. It was a practice that they used in order for them to subjugate African Americans to particular areas. And so what they would do was make those areas where only African Americans stayed. And so the areas outside of the red line were more areas that were more affluent, had more resources. And then the African American community were kind of like trapped into these communities that had very few resources. And they were like denied loans on houses. Their houses were devalued. And all of those things happened with the redlining. So it was a way in order for the realty associations and racism to prevail in the housing market, because it determined what came into your neighborhood. And so by them devaluing our neighborhoods, it determined what we didn't get, which was banks and stores and a lot of the economic development engines that went into other communities. Did that help you? I think it was Barb.
Right. I think I probably, most people know about it, but there may be some younger people that didn't come up in the era that have not are not familiar with that. And just one more thing, when Ivanka showed that area in Cleveland, is specific to looking at the redlining, we have it's all over the state. In fact, it's all over the country. So it can happen in a lot of the communities where it's within the inner city population. A lot of the redlining happen.
Yeah, that was one of the statements that I made when I first introduced the map, that the map, no matter where you look at where the African American communities are living, that red line looks exactly the same. If you follow the red line and look at the things that are going on in the community, it looks the same. No matter what community that you go into, what neighborhood that you go into, if they are African-American communities. And then now what we see is those red lines, although they technically are no longer in existence today, the residual impact is still there. And now we see like this red line that's following African Americans to suburban communities. And so wherever you see us, that's what you see around the discontinuation of services. So in the suburbs now, what you've seen now are the closing of banks, the closing of hospitals. And so when you see suburban areas become more African American focused and faced, then what you see is the discontinuation of services. And so this talks about some of the things that we've been seeing in the news. And so if you watched seen the news this weekend, and you know that there in Illinois, there was a boy who was 11 who was killed while he was defending his pregnant mom against her ex. Police said that his 5-year-old brother witnessed the attack. And so what is the impact on his 5-year-old brother? In Cleveland, Texas, a 9-year-old boy was killed protecting his mom also over the weekend. But around that, there were 3 others that were killed in the attacks, all adults. But the adults laid their bodies on top of the juveniles to keep the babies safe. So the babies were underneath their parents when they came to get them. Tamir Rice's sister, when Tamir Rice was killed by the Cleveland police, she rushed to his side upon learning from her friends. So remember, all these children were in the park. Learning that her brother had been shot, the officer tackled her, handcuffed her, and placed her in a squad car within a foot of her brother. So she could not get to him. She was trapped into a car, and then the car that she was in was the car of the officer that had just killed her brother. A Cleveland boy, 15, was killed in a racial incident on his way home from school in front of his friends. That young boy was my brother. That was in 1987. Cleveland mother, 24, killed by her ex-husband in front of her 4 young children, my mom. Warrensville Heights mom, last year, was killed in front of her teenage daughter. Rachel Gentry, who was the witness who was on the phone with Trayvon Martin, just before he was killed. She was a young woman. She was 8. She was 19 years old at the time. A Minneapolis girl, too, witnessed the murder of her mom. And her family talked about her inability to sleep and some of the things that were going on with her. But I read about these things and see them in the news all the time. But about 25 years ago in Chicago, there was a young man. I cannot remember his name, his first name, but I will never forget that his nickname was Yummy because his grandmother said he liked candy. And so she nicknamed him Yummy. He was lured to his death by teens after participating in a drive-by shooting. They lured him into underneath the railroad tracks in Chicago and assassinated him. And it made the world news. So when we talk about these things, these are not isolated incidents. And the fact that you have other teens that are witnessing, other young people that are witnessing, other families that are being impacted, the impact on the community. So the ACEs of trauma are forms of physical, emotional abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. They generally include the following. So they can include physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, emotional and physical neglect, living with a family member with a mental health or substance use disorder, witnessing of domestic violence, sudden separation from a loved one. Poverty is important for us to understand because I have that 19.5% because African-American communities in the United States, of the African-American communities that are in the United States, 19.5% live in poverty. So if this is a precursor to some of the things that are going on around ACEs and around trauma, we understand that 20% of African-Americans are in communities that are impoverished. The impact of racism and discrimination, which they don't talk about enough, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. Violence in the community. So looking at community violence and how it impacts the things that are going on. Divorce, the impact of divorce on children or on families also. My parents were divorced. My parents had been divorced for a year before my father broke down our door and murdered my mom. And for children witnessing violence against particularly their mother, and not saying that, you know, that they haven't witnessed against their father, but we see a lot of other traumatic experiences around violence against your mom. Mental illness, looking at that correlation between mental illness and ACEs, and having a relative who has been sent to jail or prison. We can never forget the prison, the cradle to prison pipeline. We cannot forget the war on drugs, which became a war on the African American community, sending many innocent people to jail for long terms. The separation from mother to child, what happened around children and their parents. And so this information came from Health and Human Services. We also understand that people who live through ACEs of trauma will often struggle as adults. Trauma increases the risk of depression and substance abuse and can lead to more aggressive behaviors in adulthood. So research shows, for instance, that ACEs increases the odds of alcohol and drug abuse, which also increase the risk of smoking. We talk about, I talk about the risk of smoking for particularly the African American community, because the tobacco corporations actually on purpose targeted us with mentholated products. More than 90% of smokers, African American smokers, smoke mentholated products, which means it cuts down on your ability to cough because it stops you from coughing. And it allows the poison to go deeper into your lungs. So the adverse effect over a lifetime of having other types of issues around heart disease, around stroke, around cancers, increases with smoking. Depression, leading a more sedentary lifestyle, which leads to obesity. So we know people who have depressive issues that may, eat a lot more healthy foods, unhealthy foods, having employment difficulties, not being able to either get a job, keep a job, getting along with employers or coworkers. We see a lot more incidences of workplace violence than we've ever seen. Health issues such as diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and stroke, being at a higher risk of contracting an STD or STI, a sexually transmitted infection, because of the struggles and the depressive issues, and not looking at yourself and valuing some of the things, doing a lot more risky behavior, or also attempting suicide, which we see a lot more in the African American community as of late, particularly around African American boys. The rate of suicide in African American boys has dramatically increased over these last 15 years. So 3 strikes. We talk about people who live with higher incidence of ACEs were more likely to drop out or not complete high school, be unemployed, living in a household below the poverty level. I'm going to keep bringing that up because I think that we have to talk about how do we fix this around making sure that particularly kinship families are receiving the support, the monies that they need in order for them to provide the services that children need. 1 in 6 adults experience 4 or more types of ACEs. So we talked about these types of ACEs. So 1 in 6 adults are experiencing those. 5 of 10, at least 5 of the top 10 leading causes of deaths are associated with ACEs. And then 44%, preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. Reducing ACEs. So we preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. This whole thing around discrimination, racism and ACEs, for me, this is a big deal because we don't talk enough about the racial impact around ACEs. I'm trying to, do 2 screens here so I can have the top parts. Racial discrimination and other adverse childhood experiences as risk factors for internalizing mental health concerns among Black youth. Racial discrimination represents a prevalent ACE among Black youth that can be detected among children as young as 6 years old. Alarmingly, Black adolescents report an average of 5 encounters of racial discrimination per day. It comes as no surprise that depression and anxiety are among the most pronounced mental health problems associated with racial discrimination among Black youth. I bring that up because I have an African American son. He'll be 27 years old, but I remember him being young and going out with me and watching he's with me and the impact of other people, pulling away from things or holding on to their purse. And then as he would go walk around in the community, I would always tell him when he would walk from my house to my grandmother's house, who lived probably about 10 minutes away, I would say, say hi to everybody that's in your yard. That way, if anything happens, they saw you. They saw you come through, you said hi. And I remember he told me the number of people that didn't respond back to him when he, as a child, would walk through the neighborhood and say hi. And for that impacted him. The fact that I'm walking through my neighborhood, saying hi to people that should be my neighbors, that I should feel safe in my neighborhood, and that they don't feel safe, even though I am no threat to them. And so I brought that up at a community meeting because a lot of times what happens is we push the whole persona of other communities onto our community. And so we have to make sure that we are talking to our young people. We can't have young people that are saying hi and we say nothing. We can't walk through, past young people and not respond back. Every time I'm out and I see young people outside, I'm like, hey, how are y'all doing? Is everything going okay? And they always say, oh, yeah, everything's okay, ma'am. I'm old enough now to be a ma'am, but hey, ma'am. And so for me, I think it's important for us to acknowledge them because they go through so much. Just think about the impact that we have as adults experiencing racism. And so youth who haven't fully developed their frontal lobe around those thinking and reasoning skills are experiencing 5 encounters of racial discrimination per day. That's a lot. And so we also must look at how we examine these systems. We have some systems that are totally structured on racism. So whether we talk about our healthcare system and how people are able to access healthcare, our food and food delivery systems around particularly food areas where we have food apartheid. Food apartheid is where food on purpose, not food deserts, food apartheid is where on purpose you did not bring services to communities. Like it wasn't something that just happened. You on purpose made sure that certain communities were not able to get access to food. And so that's one of the things that Ron talked about earlier for us, for the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. We understand the impact around food, around people's mental health. And so at the very beginning of COVID, this is 4 years ago, actually the other day, we decided that we would send out meals to disabled children and their families. Not because I wanted to do it, because I'm not a food service program. It was because I called the schools because they gave the plan. And the plan was, we need your kid to go to the bus stop at the end of their street, up the street from their house or wherever it was, get on a bus, go to the school, get off the bus, walk into the school, get into a line, get a breakfast or a lunch, get back on the bus, go back to their neighborhood, and then walk back home. I thought, who thought up this plan? And so for me, it was, okay, well, if a lot of children that are disabled are being raised in kinship households, then if something happens to their caregivers, what will happen to our children? Our children will be tossed into these systems, children that understand nothing about these systems. And so what happened throughout COVID is that African-American children were 2.4 times more likely to be orphaned as a direct result of COVID. And so here in Cleveland, we were able to send out 250,000 meals over 2 years to disabled children and their families. Not just meals, PPE equipment, boots, coats, gloves, hats, like everything they needed in order for them to be safe and be in place. Movie nights. We looked at the barriers to health and wellness, and how could we make sure that we provided people with what they needed. The structural racism in the education system, which took counseling out of educational centers and added police. The environmental racism, when we look at the things that are going on around our air, our land, and our water, and how those also lead to some of the impact around ACEs. The policies and laws, how do we make sure that the policies and laws that are in place should be there to protect us? But if they're not, how do we make sure that we're able to have access to people that can help us write new laws to help change the things that are going on? Our transportation systems, which don't take into account disabled folks, the things that are going on in houses, or having bus routes that are a mile from people's homes where they would have to walk in order to take a bus to go to the doctor's office. So looking at the racial impact around what happens around not being able to get to the places that you need to get the services that you need. Our housing structures, particularly for kinship care, making sure that we have housing in place that's able to have seniors and their grandchildren stay in the same space. Right now, what we have is we have systems that are, this is senior housing, this is family housing, and we don't have enough housing for kinship care. And so we have to make sure that we're pushing to make sure that we have an adequate amount of housing. Our employment opportunities, looking at paying people a fair wage and a living wage, making sure that people are able to have money in order to live. We talked about this whole thing around poverty. We have people who are impoverished that are working 3 and 4 jobs. How can you work 3 or 4 jobs and be impoverished? It's because you're not getting paid enough. So we need to make sure that we are paying people a living wage. And then economics, looking at our economic system and how it disproportionately impacts people. And then saying, what are some of the things that need to be put in place in order for us to make sure that any kind of economic barriers are eliminated. So structural racism is something that's very important when we're talking about ACEs. The other thing is environmental toxins and ACEs. So I talked a little bit about this whole thing around cumulative impact around air, land, and water. I'm part of the Biden's administration National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And I represent the Farm Workers and Pesticides Group. So I talk about these environmental toxins and the things that are going on with our farm workers, but I also transfer that information over to the things that are going on in my community, because the farm workers asked me to represent their community on the advisory committee. And I make sure that, the things that I'm looking at are things that are also disproportionately impacting my community. We know that environmental toxins common in urban environments contribute, and that's because we don't have a tree canopy. We have all of these factories or old factories that are in our neighborhoods, different kinds of smelting plants, that environmental toxins common in urban environments contribute to cognitive outcomes that are associated with the environment and childhood nurturing. The relationship between ACEs and environmental exposures reveals adverse outcomes in children's neurocognitive development. These cognitive outcomes include learning disabilities, lowered IQ, memory and attention problems, and overall poor educational outcomes. Okay, so let's say that the relationship between ACEs and environmental exposures. So we need to also understand around how we live, where we live, disproportionately impacts our children, whether it be learning disabilities, lowered IQ, memory, or attention problems. Lead poisoning and ACEs. This is a big thing for me. I do a lot of work here around policy and lead poisoning. I actually wrote the policy for the city of Cleveland that they adopted and decided to take out the meat of my policy. Now they realize that they screwed up and they have to go back and fix it. But I talk about lead poisoning because lead poisoning to me is public enemy number one. Lead is a neurotoxin which can cause educational disabilities, behavioral challenges, and organ failure. There is no safe level of lead of exposure to lead. It can cause learning disabilities, behavioral problems, seizures, and in extreme cases, death. Lead is particularly dangerous to children under the age of 6. Remember where we talked about ACEs that won the 17 years old? Because their growing bodies absorb more lead than adults. And their developing brains and nervous system are more sensitive to lead's damaging effects. Lead exposure is manifest in adults. So childhood lead exposure manifests itself in adults by increased risk of heart and kidney disease, dementia, and diabetes are all directly tied to lead poisoning. Lead never goes away. It just changes where it is in your body. It goes from your blood to your bones and then to the soft tissue, to your organs. Lead, the children are attracted to lead because lead is sweet like candy. That's why children are attracted to lead. Most people don't realize that lead has a sweet taste. And once children get a hold of it, they want more. So what will happen is they may have some things that they're looking at as being behavior issues in school that are actually directly related to lead poisoning that they'll misdiagnose as other things like ADHD or autism when it's actually lead poisoning. Unresolved trauma in ACEs.
Ivanka, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Can you give some examples of where children can get a hold of lead and how they are exposed to it?
Okay. So lead poisoning, children are exposed to lead in a number of ways. One can be through, so if you live in an older home that was built before 1978, lead was outlawed in paint in 1978. And let's make no mistake about it. Even though it was outlawed in paint here in the United States in 1978, Sherwin-Williams still sells a brand of paint that has lead in it. Their Dutch Boy brand. So their Dutch Boy brand paint that they sell to other countries still has lead in it. Why lead in paint? Lead makes your walls shiny. It makes the paint shiny. So I remember growing up, going to my great-grandmother's house, and my great-grandmother had the shiniest white walls I've ever seen in my life. Did not figure out why. And then as I got older, I realized they looked that way because of the lead that was in them. And we painted our house twice a year. So we would paint like right before Easter and then right at Christmas time. So 2 times a year, my great-grandmother would paint her walls. And that's because unlike the latex paint of today, where you can just kind of wash things off, the old paint, you couldn't just wash things off. You had to paint over it. But children are exposed to lead through chip paint that's in their homes. So they may find some paint that's chipped. The other thing is a lot of homes have carpet in them. And so when children are learning how to walk and they're crawling on the floor, they get the lead dust and the particles on their hands. And because kids do a whole lot of hand and mouth, they may lick it. And then what happens is they taste the sweet and they continue to go back to the source. The other thing is those old wooden frame windows. So what happens is if you have the old tongue and groove windows where if you look them up and you see the string, the rope that's in the windows, when those ropes, the friction goes from the up and down, the dust particles are released into the room. And so usually in old houses in particular, if you have an old house, I got an old house, and you look at where window sills are just high enough for children to pull up on. They're lower to the floor than new houses. So children use those things to pull up, and then they usually have their new coming in teeth, and they might clamp onto the window sill, touch it, get the dust, the lead dust into their hands. The other place it can come from is outside, taking it from outside and walking it through your house. So sometimes people, I know at my house growing up, we took our shoes off. You know, no one ever came through the house with their shoes on. And so that doesn't happen a lot now. And so when you're walking through the house, and you're walking from outside and through the house, everything that you have on your feet from outside is coming into your home. And so those are some of the ways that that we see our children getting exposed to lead. The others is that some of the old school buildings, we've actually had instances where we've had children who, because the lead paint is on the walls in old schools, where they chipped the paint from the walls, it started chipping, they got a hold of it, and they literally ate the wall around where their seats are. So those are the things for you to watch out for, and to make sure that if you are in a home that's a rental property, that you're making sure that you tell your landlord if you see any types of cracks or chips in the walls, so that it can be painted over. Because the one thing that you want to do is make sure that you're painting the walls and not having any chipping. Paint with windows, looking at programs that offer an opportunity for you to have new replacement windows put in, so that you don't have the windows that have the tongue and groove. And then looking at making sure if you have carpet, maybe taking the carpet up and having hardwood floors, so that you don't have the carpet that has everything that has settled in there. So Barbara, did that answer your question? I think that was you that answered it, that asked.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's, a lot of issues that a lot of families probably aren't aware of in terms of older homes, and that school thing that you just talked about, that was something I would never have thought about. So those are things to be more aware of. So thank you. Yes.
And then being mindful, like a lot of times what happens is they determine that you have lead outside, because I have an XRF machine. So we're actually able, myself and my team, because I founded another agency that focuses on lead, we're able to go out and test different areas around the soil. So we test the soil for lead. Now, one of the things that we look at is we tell people to put mulch on the soil. But last year, I think I had an aha moment when I was in San Juan doing some work, and realized that there is no federal regulations on where mulch comes from. So mulch may come from a place that had lead in it, and they mulched the wood or the trees down. And now you're putting them into your yard. So where you think that you are helping a problem, you're actually causing a bigger problem. So it's important for us to know that there is no regulation on mulch. There's nothing on your bag of mulch that says this mulch came from a lead-free area.
There's a comment from one of our caregivers, or I'm sorry, one of our navigators from Montgomery County, Sandy Bryant, made a comment about soil that has had chips and runoff from the source of lead in water pipes, toys from other countries, pottery glazed with lead, dishes, serving dishes, candy wrappings that are from other countries with bright colors, and lead in spices. I think a lot of the things that we import, we don't know what's in or on those items.
So what I can tell her, if she wants me to do a presentation about lead, I can, but I was trying to stick my presentation to trauma. But yeah, all of those things are definitely associated with lead, particularly around pottery, around buying candy from the dollar store, and pottery pieces from the dollar store, because what happens is when you use clay pottery, lead is in those clay pots. The lead leaches into your food, so it makes your food get a sweet taste. And so what happens is cooks who are using clay pottery don't want to change pots, because their food has a different taste than if they use another type of pot. And so I tell people, well, just toss a little bit of sugar in there, put a little dash, and that'll help you. But the candies, the wrappers, and also cans. Like if you look at soda pop cans, and a lot of soda pop cans are not made here. The red, why it's so vibrant, and the blues are why they're so vibrant, is because of the lead that's on the can. And so we have to be very mindful about the things that we are eating that are being imported from other places, because they don't have the regulations that we have here. With the with the pipes in your homes. So if you don't know, now you will know, is that Flint, Michigan's lead poisoning rate is about 7.2%. And in the city of Cleveland, we have the highest in Ohio. Our lowest rate is twice as high as Flint, Michigan. So Flint, Michigan's rate is 7.2%. Our lowest rate is 14.2% here in Cleveland. We have some kindergarten classes where more than 90% of the children are lead poisoned. And it is because directly related, not to the water source, but to the paint that's in the house. We do a pretty good job around water monitoring here. But when we look at older homes that have leaded pipes, one of the things that the EPA has now had a mandate that came through the White House is that all states in the United States have to fix your plumbing that's coming into your house. They have 10 years to do it. So if you get a contact from the city that says we need to look at, or from the county that says that we need to change out your pipes, it's because they have 10 years in order for them to change out the pipes in every home, every older home in the United States. And so we are pushing to make sure that that happens. I hope that answered your question.
We might need to do another whole meeting on just lead.
Okay.
Thank you.
And there is a lead and crime hypothesis too. I talk about there is a correlation directly between lead and crime. And so we talk about ACEs and crime. And so there is a correlation between lead and crime. And we bring in a scientist that we have been working with who is in New Mexico, who comes in to do a presentation. So we've had her here twice to come in and do a presentation. Unresolved trauma and ACEs. So the reason why why ACEs create so much havoc in our lives is due to unresolved trauma. Trauma changes who you are on the inside. It alters your nervous system. It sticks with you. They haunt you. Trauma haunts you and makes it difficult to ignore or push away. Like the young girl that I was talking about earlier that they said was 2 years old and could not sleep. She had witnessed her mom's murder, and we think that the children just bounce back, that something happens and then kids are playing. And that's not the case for everybody. And even though you are an adult, deep down inside, you still carry the child who was scarred and scared. And so for me, I talk about things from a child's vantage point because of the things that happened to me when I was so young, the things that I witnessed, the things that, that forever changed my life. Unresolved trauma on nervous system operates in your fight or flight all the time. So that means if you have unresolved trauma, your nervous system operates in this fight or flight mode all the time. This is how the body tries to protect you. This is in the background, unnoticed, until memories come back in the form of flashbacks or anxiety. You ever, had an experience growing up and then all of a sudden and it was traumatic and you thought about it and you felt the same way that like it just happened? For people who are going through ACEs and going through unresolved trauma, that happens to them a lot. And so they may have times when they can't leave the house or can't fully function, or days when they're just not right. And it's because those anxieties are always there because their body is always in this fight or flight mode. I put this tree up. So we have this healthy tree on the one side, and we talk about, it says, at the top, it says, our environments cultivate our communities, and our communities nurture our health. And so we talked about what happens in communities that are plagued by ACEs. They look like the tree that's dying. We see this violence, we see substance abuse, we talked about smoking, infant mortality, we talked about obesity, malnutrition, we talked about STDs, stress, heart disease. When inequities are high and community assets are low, health outcomes are worse. And so we talk about these fragmented systems, the restricted power, the disinvestment, the disconnected members, adverse living conditions, poor quality of schools, poverty, which is a big thing that I talk about, the segregation, occupational hazards, what kind of jobs do you have when you are unskilled a labor force? Institutional racism, working marketing for tobacco and alcohol. So we talked about this whole thing around marketing. Unemployment rates, environmental toxins, and then discrimination. Those are all things to keep in mind when we're talking about communities that are impacted by ACEs. The dark side of coping is this unresolved trauma. People try to numb themselves with alcohol, drugs, or other addictions. Your life feels out of control. You can't seem to shake the feeling. That's the dark side of what we see when people are trying to cope, that they do all of these other things because they're calling it their way to cope, but it's actually making it worse. For us to make sure that they understand that this isn't their fault. You are not to blame for being exposed to adverse childhood experiences. The impact of those experiences will linger in your life for years. And that's why it's so important for people to seek outside help. For us, we have to make sure that people understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Many children who experience trauma go on to lead relatively normal lives. I think I live a relatively normal life. I think I have some times when, yeah, I can be some places, but in others, there is hope. The mind says that it is hopeless. Therapy offers a real opportunity. And so we have to make sure that we're seeking out services, and seeking out the right services. Seeking out trauma treatment or trauma-informed care, making sure that we're being the biggest advocates that we can for our children that have experienced trauma, and making sure that we're researching. If the doctor says we want to put them on this pill or this medicine, that you're researching it and you know what kind of medicine it is, or you talk to somebody else who may have experienced the same thing. So you can say, you know, they want to put my child on this medicine, or they want to put my child on lithium. And you say, I looked that up. I don't think so. Let's figure out something else. Let's figure out if it's some other ways. One of the things that I do here is we do a program for teens. It's called Teen Truth. So we bring teens here to talk about advocacy. But in that advocacy piece, learning around how to advocate around legislation around tobacco, or looking at healthy foods, or helping us to create billboard campaigns that we put up all over the community, or doing healthy cooking sessions, or yoga. You know, all the things that they're able to do. A couple of the things that have gone on that when we've had our Teen Truth is, one time we had a young lady who everything that we gave her to eat, you know, whether we had breakfast, lunch, and all these snacks, they have breakfast. We're working with teens. We got to have food for them all day long. She would put it in a bag. She never ate anything. She was putting everything in a bag. And so I went to talk to her and told her, look, it's plenty of food here. If you need some stuff that you want to take home, you're more than welcome to take it home. But while you're here, you can eat your food, enjoy your food. And so once I started talking to her, and she knew she could take stuff home for later, because what happens is when you have serious hunger issues, and knowing that you're not going to be able to eat later, you know, you kind of hoard things. And so for her, she wanted to make sure that she had enough to take back for brothers and sisters. So when she left, we made sure that she has enough to take back for her brothers and sisters and for herself for later on. And so making sure that we're looking at the things that are going to hold person. The other thing is that we had a young man who was in one of our Teen Truth programs, and it was a sunshiny day. We were all outside. The youth are in these different stations and they're doing different things. And he was just sitting on the steps. He had his head back, he had his eyes closed, and he was just loving it, soaking in the sun. He came back to me later and he said, "Is this Cleveland?" I said, "Yeah." And he didn't believe me. So he asked someone else. And she said, "Yeah, it's Cleveland." And I thought about what he said. And he was so at peace. He was able to close his eyes, lay his head back, not worry about anything else. And for him, he thought this could not possibly be the community that he lives in, because where he's at is not like this. There was peace here. There was kindness here. There was, an opportunity for him to just sit back and just be a kid, just sit back and be a kid. And so sometimes we have to make sure that we offer those opportunities, but we have to always make sure that we're offering those opportunities for our young people. So this case for equity, because we get all these people that keep talking about equity. And I wanted to make sure that I put this into this because I think that so many people talk about equity and really don't really talk about equity. So health equity is achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his or her full health potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. So when people talk about equity, this is what they mean. That's not what they do, but this is what it's supposed to look like. So we have to make sure that we challenge folks that talk about equity and don't talk about equity. So for us, the bigger part of this is change. We have to change how people think about the causes of ACEs and who could help prevent them. We have to shift the focus from individual responsibility to community solutions. What can we do together to help change this? We have to reduce the stigma around seeking help with parenting challenges or for substance misuse, depression, or suicidal thoughts. We have to promote safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments where children live, learn, and play. We have to make sure that we're looking at ACEs policy change to include racism and lead, which is something that they don't talk about when they're talking about ACEs. We have to make sure that we're looking at progressive leadership, the people who are willing to talk about the things that some of our mainstream electives are not. We have to change our school funding formula because we have to make sure that we have services in inner city schools that are available in suburban schools. One of them is, I did a program at a suburban school that's in one of the wealthiest suburbs in Rocky River. And I was in the school and I walked past a room and I kind of looked through the door and it looked like a fish tank. The walls were blue. It looked like you were sitting at the water. And they said, "Oh, this is our timeout room. This is where children can come and get themselves together if they feel that they're being, if they're having some time, they need some time alone." And I'm thinking, time alone. In urban America, we call the police. And so looking at that school funding formula and really using it to change how we view education. We have to pay people a living wage. I talked about poverty and this whole issue around poverty and ACEs. And we have to train more Black male therapists and teachers. We need Black teachers and we need Black male therapists. And we have to make sure that we're looking at equitable, talk to you about health equity, equitable kinship funding. We have to make sure that we're giving funding to families in an equitable way, whether it's if we're going to give adopted families a certain amount of money, then we have to make sure that we're doing the same thing for kinship families. And then last but not least is this Kerner Commission report. So the Kerner Commission report came out in February of 1968. It was the most progressive report that ever came out in the United States history. There has never been a report like the Kerner Commission report. And what it did was it shed a light on the issues that were going on in urban America and the cause of those issues, particularly the cause of the things that plague the community most. And one of them is ACEs. And it said what white Americans can never fully understand, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. In other words, white institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. We have to do everything that we can to make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable citizens from the impact, lifelong impact that ACEs causes. I am Ivanka Hall. I am the Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ivanka. That was absolutely wonderful. I think it has given us a lot to think about and a lot to take with us and do some more exploration, some more learning about. I think there's probably time for maybe a few questions. And so what I'm going to do is ask Barbara if you will help if someone has a question. You all know I'm pretty old school, so I don't know. I think there's something you can put a hand up or something like that. And so however you all do it, but I'm just not very good at it. But if there are any questions of Ivanka, we would take them now. Just to remember, if you're a kinship caregiver, to put your name in the chat to Barbara. We'll put your name in the chat so that you can be registered for the $50 gift card that we'll be announcing very shortly. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Dewberry.
I want to ask the presenter, if you have a young person who's lost both their mother and father, but never talks about it, never show visibly any emotions about it, should I be concerned about trying to get, should I be concerned about trying to get him to talk about it, or just wait until he gets ready to talk about it himself?
Maybe not you, but maybe having him talk to a counselor about it.
Yeah, he goes to a counselor, but he won't talk about it. Never, ever.
Because, and it depends, because maybe that's not the counselor that he wants. Maybe he needs another counselor.
Okay.
That could be his way of saying, this is not the person that I want. I remember my son had a counselor and he said, I do not like him, and like, I'm like, why don't, well, it's time to get ready for, I don't like him. So we went to go pick out another counselor. We got into this counselor's office and his phone rang. And his message was like, don't push me because I'm close to my son was like, okay, I want him to be my counselor. I'm like, okay, well, we got the rap music counselor here.
Okay.
He just needed somebody that he could relate to. And so for him, that one incident made him say, okay, I think, I might be able to relate to him a little more than the person that I'm relating to. And, because we don't have enough African-American psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists. We really don't. And we need to make sure that just because they're a therapist doesn't mean they're culturally competent or culturally proficient. And so we need to make sure that we understand that too. Some people are there for the money. They're not there because they're looking at the issues that are impacting your children and how to help fix it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Well, again, I thank you, Ivanka. And Ivanka is also nationally recognized around cultural competence and proficiency, and that is yet another topic that I think we would benefit from having some information from her on. So, Barbara, if you want to announce, if you're ready to announce who the winner of the $50 gift card is.
Okay. And I want to say that there are a lot of great replies and comments about how informative your presentation has been, Ivanka, in the chat. So thank you. It's made an impact, and I think it's broader than what anybody ever thought in terms of some of the situations you brought up that people can relate to in their own lives. And so I think that's been a good outcome of your presentation. Is it's opened up a broader world of what ACEs can be or may be in other people's lives that they never thought about. And I think that's critical. And I have also noticed that we have quite a few caregivers online and an increase in caregiver participation, which I'm glad to see. We tried to meet the request of the caregivers that responded to our survey about a year ago to change the date and the time. And hopefully this will mean that we can get more caregivers to participate and get information. And so for today, the caregiver that's been chosen to receive the gift card is Miss Andrea Fleming. She's online and has been identified as a caregiver. So Miss Fleming, I'll contact you after the meeting to get your mailing information so we can provide the gift card to you. And thanks to all the other caregivers that are online and all the other representatives from agencies. I see Job and Family Services is on, the new Department of Children and Youth. And so we welcome you and everybody else that has joined us today. And please come back next month for our meeting.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. And so if you all remember, the meeting next month is Monday, April 15th, 2024, and the topic is Recovery Ohio. So if there's no other comments, Ivanka, did you want to give any final comments?
No, I saw where someone talked about the cost of getting things done in your house around. I'm sure the cost of replacing windows, carpeting, etc. is quite prohibitive for many. But taking up carpet and having hardwood floors is taking up your carpet. Having someone take up the carpet is not expensive. And then replacing windows, it depends on whether you have a senior services division. Like, you should be able to go to them and find out what programs they have. Because if you have a child under the age of 6, we actually have free programming that will replace your windows in your house. They'll actually replace your windows. They'll replace your carpet. I know at least here in Cobb County. So they may have some of the same things in some of the other counties.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Ivanka, again. This has been absolutely wonderful, and we appreciate all that you shared with us today and look forward to the time we can bring you back for some additional topics. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful beginning to spring, which I believe begins next week. So take care, everybody. Goodbye.